Right. Kind of want to go over this reading here a little bit. Hopefully, you had a chance to take a look at it. This concept of senpai and kohai, which are, I think, kind of integral to understanding Japanese culture. And I think the reading puts it there, kind of outlines some main points here. I also uploaded a video, which I think is really interesting in that it kind of explains this concept, the senpai sort of seniority, kohai juniors, and that relationship and dynamic within Japan. But also, if you watch the video, also has sort of a panel of non-Japanese people who kind of who look at this much differently. So I think it's a really interesting dynamic to see, because from the from the internal Japanese side, this is sort of second nature, right? It's enforced in schools, and from schools, right, it goes to the workplace, and in many, almost all aspects of life, there's really people try to kind of see where they fit within this senior junior relationship. Right? And again, I think from the outside, it's from the outsider perspective, it's really hard to sort of come to grips with it. But I've noticed through my own sort of interactions, like like my wife, when she meets somebody new, its initial sort of the first sort of phases of getting to know each other are seeing where they fit in this dynamic. Are they older in rank? Should you or are you the kohai? Are you the senpai? And once you establish that, then it allows sort of the conversation. Once you get where you are in that sort of cultural system, you can then sort of discuss, because a lot of it is reflected in language. There's certain linguistical attributes you use to, or different ways you conjugate different verbs. The book kind of goes through this a little bit as well, to show respect. Right? We don't really have that in English, but in other languages you can conjugate particularly verbs to be more respectful, or use different terminology in much more sort of respectful way. If you know any French, right, vous, right, there's sort of the respectful you, or nous for we, would be kind of close to that sort of the honorific systems. So but this is really what, and so I mean, it really is pervasive throughout most of Japan, that you really kind of have to figure out where you fit within this senior junior system, because there's different wherever you are in this, there's different sort of behaviors that you're expected of. Right? If you're a senpai, you're a senior, so you're the seniority. And a lot of this is based specifically on age. Which again, I think that video really does a good job of looking at. One of them is, one of the little excerpts of the video is they're on a baseball team, and the moms are all sort of, the moms help out with the baseball team, and the senpai kohai relationships there are based strictly on the age of the child, right? If the child is older, is a senpai on the team, then the moms of that team will be also the senpai, versus the younger kids, the moms, even if they're older. Like they interview one who's like a 50-year-old mom, but she's lower because her son's age is lower. So it's this really interesting dynamic, but it's really pervasive. And again, from the outsider perspective, we really don't have to worry about this. I mean, I think people in Japan sort of understand that, there's that's not, that we sort of, from being outside of Japan, you don't really fit into this system. But it's also, it's good to know, because if you are in Japan, or if you interact with people in Japan, those who are senior or elders, some sort of expect to be honored in a way, and followed. Which again is different than sort of the American thing, where America it's very much based on ability, right? Where you could be younger but be much more knowledgeable, or be more skilled at something, but in Japan that wouldn't matter. You would still be kohai to a senpai. So it's an interesting dynamic. Again, I think the video does a really good job of explaining it. The reading, I think, does some good ideas as well, especially sort of explaining where this comes from, right? That this idea of loyalty and honor and respect is very much Confucian. Right? This Confucian values, and we know that those were brought over by China, or brought from China into Japan, and introduced sort of this Confucian ideal of filial piety, right? Which is the honor of the son to the father, and if that relationship is one of honor and respect in the family, right, and it will sort of expand out to society, then the subject will respect the emperor, right? This sort of relationship there. So it's sort of the Confucian ideals, which play very well into the traditional Japanese family system, the ie system, where you usually have a head, a patriarchal figure, right? The eldest male, right, will dictate many of sort of the decisions for the family, right? Everything will kind of go through the male. Inheritance, marriages, family decisions are all sort of based on this sort of patriarchal structure, which then gets implemented in this sort of Sempai Kohai. Though in the video, again, they do interview women who are in these relationships as well, which are very interesting. So that's why I think that the video really sort of addresses a lot of these. And then the reason why I put it into this week, right, is because these kind of get enforced in 1898. Right in the Meiji era, as the Meiji are trying to modernize, they adapt what are called civil codes, right, which are sort of that every citizen is adheres to. And again, this is why nations are different than, say, kingdoms and monarchies. In a kingdom and a monarchy, those laws might be different for people of different statuses, right? A king can do things that the commoner can't. In a idealized nation, right, these civil codes, civil laws apply to everyone. Right, that the president of the United States is presumably held to the same standard as the farmer or an 18-year-old high school graduate, right? They would have in front of the law, right? Those two people would be completely equal, and this is what these 1898 civil codes did, and a lot of them borrowed from this and sort of reinforced this patriarchal society, right? And that these civil codes, especially inheritance and sort of the male, senior male as sort of the head of things, gets sort of brought into these civil codes there. So that's where sort of it gets codified, and then ultimately it's really it's not so much a law now, but it's very much part of the culture, right? And the book talks about this as well, right? That this starts in schools, right? It starts at from first grade onwards, right? If you're a first grader, right, you will have to sort of help out or be junior to a second grader or a third grader, right? And likewise, and when you get to second grade, your kohai, the first graders, will be junior to you, right? So there's this constant relationship. So in some situations, right, you are the kohai, you have to sort of be respectful and obedient and follow certain rules with senpais, but in other cases, you are the senpai and those below you are there. And those sort of cultural reinforcement from a very young age are very much part of this system. And then what happens in school then gets applied to work. That when you enter a company, and again, the Japanese companies are a little bit different. A lot of companies in Japan, once you get into a company, most people, it's changing a little bit today, but most people stay at that company for life. Right? There's sort of the mega corporations, which again, if we look at the Meiji area, these zaibatsus, these mega corporations, these start to form, and they get bigger and bigger, and they're things like Mitsubishi are still around today. But if you join a company, right, you are then at the lowest, and so you have all the senpai above you, and you have to then kind of follow or dictate it on those along those sort of social obligations. And then as you go up in rank, age really, you get more pay, then you have kohais below you, right? And that's kind of how it goes. And again, this is a little bit different than the American system or the Western system, where really work, especially in the workplace, it's much more from our perspective based on ability, right? If you come in, you're fresh out of college, but you're like the best programmer around, right? You will join a company and, you could take a leadership position, right? If you have those kind of skills, where in Japan that would never fly, right? You could be the best programmer around, but you would still be ranked lower than the senpai, or you would have to sort of honor the senpai. And the video again sort of talks about why this is sometimes confusing, because you have bosses, actual bosses that make decisions, but but then you have this other layer, this sort of cultural layer of superiors, these senpais that you have to also sort of respond to and respect. So, how that works and that dynamic within the workplace is it's challenging. But then again, they also do some interviews with people, Japanese people, who say, on the one hand, this really helps out, right? That it sort of, maybe you have a boss who's not very good, who got put in there because, they came from a really good family, or somebody in their family, they got this position and they're not a very good boss. Well, the senpai, sort of system will help alleviate that, right? That you can then, the senpais can kind of, because they're older, even though they're not the boss by title, they can still have this sort of prestige. And similarly, kind of helps people navigate these systems, right? They know what place they're in, so they can kind of work within that relationship. Right? So I think that the video is really good on that, explaining those. And there's definitely pros and cons, which again, I think the video really explains. And again, if you do anything within sort of a Japanese art, martial art, or the tea ceremony, right, this is inherent, right? If you're the kohai, if you come in and you're the first person, you are expected to do everything, right? You have to clean the floors, clean up after everything. I mean, I took Iaido for, for about a year, and I was always the lowest, and I wasn't even Japanese, but everyone expected me to adhere to the system, right? I would come in, I'd be the first one there, I'd have to clean some stuff up, I'd expected to be the first one helping set everything up, and I was also then conversely expected to be the last person there, right? Because I was the lowest on the totem pole, that I was responsible for cleaning everything up. And at first I was like, what? I don't understand this, right? Where is this coming from? And then it was explained to me that this is the system, that when you come into it, you start at the lowest and you work your way up, and then somebody else will come lower, and then it's your job to sort of train them, right? So you can kind of see that this sort of inherent training system also allows for some stability within these systems. So it's definitely an interesting dynamic. Again, from the outside perspective, there won't be much expectations for if you went to Japan, you wouldn't have to really worry about this. Though you would like to keep this in mind, and anytime you deal with somebody older than you, have a little bit of respect within that system. I would suggest going in like that, which again I think is pretty normal. Kind of way you'd want to approach things anyway. Don't backmouth, your elders. That's pretty universal. But it is something to keep in mind while you're there. And again, if you were planning to go on and learn Japanese, right, the language really takes care of a lot of this itself. You talk to people in a different tone, especially in the workplace. The book talks about this. There's this language, keigo. Keigo is a way in which people are. It's inherently sort of honorifics within language, that certain cadences you would use within these relationships reflect senior junior status. But again, unless you speak Japanese, you probably don't need to worry about that too much. But I think this is very much part of Japanese culture. And again, I think that video does a really good job of explaining this system and giving good examples of it. So have a look at the video, do the reading, and we'll jump into the next topic next week. And if you want to, also look over the discussion questions. Again, read those out. Read the instructions for that. They're optional, but if you do them, I'll give you 5 points. So kind of extra credit as well if you're trying to kind of if you want to kind of keep up with the readings and all of that as well. So there you go. Have a good week. Hope you're getting used to this online system.